Chandpal Ghat, June 15, 1824. From here, Bishop Reginald Heber set sail, beginning his incredible journey across the upper provinces of India. For the next 10 months, Bishop Heber traveled across India, first by boat from Kolkata to Allahabad, and then by horse and palanquin and elephant all the way across northern and western India, ending his journey in Surat in April of 1825. Bishop Heber's visit happened at the apex of a rapid expansion of the British Empire in India. From a collection of small, albeit powerful coastal enclaves for about 30 years after the Battle of Buxar, the British Empire had expanded rapidly to include much of continental India by 1823 when the bishop visited. In fact, the only major expansion subsequently was into Ranjit Singh's Punjab. Bishop Heber was the Forrest Gump or Lal Singh Chadda of his time. He met everyone of importance, from the British Governor General to the Mughal Emperor to the founder of the Swaminarayan sect. He wrote a detailed account of his travels, which was published by his wife after his death and made her very rich. Modern India is vastly different and changing very rapidly, but if you know where to look and if you look carefully, you can still find most of the places that Bishop Heber visited during his journey. Like many British in India, including James Prinsep, in whose honor this monument was made, Bishop Heber died young at 43. Revered after his death, many monuments were made to Bishop Heber, including 3 statues by Francis Chantry, placed in London, Madras, and this one in St. Paul's Cathedral in Kolkata. The statue shows Bishop Heber kneeling in an attitude of devotion, with one hand on his heart and the other hand on this Bible. The statue predates St. Paul's Cathedral, and in fact, one of the reasons that the cathedral was made was the statue was too big for St. John's Cathedral at the time when it arrived from London. 200 years later, I will follow him on his journey. I will follow his route faithfully for the most part and hope to learn something about the history of this great land through the lens of his account. But to begin at the beginning, Bishop Heber landed here on October 10th, 1823. With him were his wife Amelia, the daughter Emily, and their beloved cocker spaniel. The Heber family must have been thrilled to make landfall here by the powder mills. It had taken them 4 months on board the Thomas Greenville on pitching and rolling seas to get from London to here. With the advent of steam-based ships and the Suez Canal, the voyage was cut down to 3 weeks. But in the 1820s, it took 4 months at the minimum to get to India from London. The Ganga flows wide here, like a sea almost, but was treacherous and shallow with many sandbars, so the VIP guests were dropped off by their ship at Diamond Harbor and were brought here on a smaller boat. Bishop Heber was immediately struck by the beauty of the countryside and made this sketch. From Powder Mills, the Heber family boarded a carriage, which then took them onwards. That the bishop was here in India at all was nothing short of a miracle. Unlike the Spaniards and the Portuguese, the British were reluctant to proselytize, preferring to focus on trade. The man single handedly responsible for making the East India Company permit religious activity in India was William Wilberforce, an abolitionist now celebrated for his tireless anti slavery work. Mostly overlooked now is his firm belief in the inferiority of other cultures and religions compared to his own. Wilberforce fought doggedly for the establishment of missionary activity in India, and later in his life he felt that this was his biggest victory, much more important than the abolition of the slave trade. While the major motivation for abolitionists was religious, they wanted to save their own souls, Bishop Heber points out a second, more practical reason. The labor of subjugated freemen was a lot cheaper than that of slaves, and the subjugated freemen were needed in large numbers all over the colonies once slavery was abolished. Tens of thousands of Indians were taken from here to colonies in America as indentured labor. Clearly, it was never the intention of Wilberforce to treat people well. The bishop noticed right away the mediocre drabness of small houses in India designed for privacy. They went through the large and handsome edifices of Garden Reach, which are mostly gone now, went through a marketplace, and eventually the Bishop family then crossed a muddy creek on a mean wooden bridge. This was Kidapur Bridge, now an industrial bridge on a branch of the Ganga. On the other side of the bridge lay Calcutta, the pearl of the British Empire. The muddy creek that the bishop saw when he passed Kidapur was the Adi Ganga, or the ancient flow of the river. It changed its course somewhere in the 16th century, but somehow this old course remained venerated by Hindus, and the new course was completely treated like a normal river. To get to the Adi Ganga, I walked through picturesque alleyways with colorful homes. I walked past a tree that is a temple, replete with an idol of Ganesha and threads tied all around for good luck. I walked past an idol venerating Sati, the custom where women would immolate themselves on their husband's pyre. This was, of course, banned by the British and is banned in modern India. I walked past a temple which has Greek influences with quasi Doric columns, and I arrive at the Adi Ganga, the ancient river. This was a clean river with a wholesome environment, and dwellings along its banks were much desirable. Today, this is an odious sewage canal. India has turned its back on all its waterways, but somehow people still retain faith. On their arrival to Kolkata, Bishop Heber and his family were first brought to Fort William, where they spent the night. This was a starship fort, a design innovation that dates to the Renaissance. In the era of cannonball, a star-shaped fort could better withstand the tangential impact of cannonballs. There was a wide moat. Both the walls and the moat seem to have disappeared, and the fort has also lost its connection with water. The water gate is now marooned on the other side of a busy highway. Upon their arrival to India, the Heber family stayed at Fort William. The Fort William that you see today was rebuilt by Lord Clive after defeat in 1857. The old fort was considered indefensible and also had the stench of defeat. Bishop Heber was struck by the number of servants that surrounded him, something that is striking to a visitor to India even today. He made a sketch of some of his servants. His daughter was encumbered by the numerous servants that surrounded her, something similar to this sketch. This later photograph by Edward Saatchi shows the multitude of servants in an Indian household, each uniquely subspecialized. There were entire guidebooks devoted to servants. One of the best descriptions of Indian servants is in Charles D. Oiley's satire, Tom Raw. The Kolkata that Bishop Heber visited was a very large metropolis with a population of more than 180,000. For comparison, New York at the time had a population of 120,000. There was a British town or a white town situated on well drained ground with large open areas, well ordered streets, and containing exquisite neoclassical mansions. Then there was a black town, with its mix of ostentatious palaces, crowded slums, disordered alleys, and haphazard bazaars. Kolkata has probably the most incredible collection of heritage buildings anywhere in India. If somehow Bishop Heber could be resurrected and brought back to life, he could perhaps find his way around Kolkata by looking at buildings like this. And everywhere I look in Calcutta, I'm surrounded by really remarkable, beautiful buildings. Perhaps the most interesting was the town hall, which the bishop thought had no other merit than size. I visit this building with its perfectly proportioned Doric columns early in the morning, and it feels like I'm intruding on the lives of the people that live here, on their bedroom and their bathroom. But I realize very quickly that Bengal has not just forgotten the British connection, there are other connections that have been forgotten too. Core communist bastion for decades, Kolkata has now relegated its communist heroes to side yards, while newer heroes occupy pedestals. The governor's palace, still the residence of the governor of West Bengal, was the beating heart of the British Empire through the 1800s. This palace, a statement in stone, was built by Lord Richard Wellesley, who was the governor of India from 1798 to 1805. It was intended to show a muscular, confident British rule to the Indians that they were here to stay. Richard Wellesley was the older brother of the legendary Arthur Wellesley, the man who crushed the Marathas, eliminated Tipu Sultan, and later became immortal after defeating Napoleon at Waterloo. Today, the governor's palace and its gates look pretty much like they did when Bishop Heber visited. The lion symbol on top of the gates symbolizes Britannia. Even though there have been no lions in England for recorded human history, the British were so possessive of the lion symbol that they would not let Indians put lions on their gates and would take them down. This painting of the Eastern Gate in 1824 shows the gate almost exactly as Bishop Heber must have seen it. Notice the large number of adjutant storks flying around. These large scavenging birds, called hargila, were once very common and could be seen on many houses all through Kolkata. and even made it to the coat of arms. And by the way, the motto of the city of Calcutta on its coat of arms is Latin for steadfast through trouble. And boy, this city has seen a lot of trouble. These magnificent birds are now long gone from Kolkata and almost extinct in India. But the eastern gate, even though obscured by vegetation, looks almost exactly as it did. Through these gates, Bishop Heber entered a building that was the apex of social life in British India. Exciting balls, dinners, dances, and ceremonies were held through the 1800s. A brutal architectural critic, he felt that the stories were too low and the building was much too pierced by windows. Bishop Heber was welcomed to Government House by Lord William Amherst, the Governor General of India. This man was the nephew of Lord Geoffrey Amherst, the first Governor General of Canada. Well known for being a genocidal maniac, he actually used smallpox blankets in war. Many towns in the United States and Canada are named after him. William Amherst was a pompous ass. His tenure was marked by mediocrity, and he started a completely unnecessary war with Burma. His wife, Lady Sarah Amherst, was older than him by 10 years and an accomplished botanist. She has many species of plants and a pheasant named after her. As stunning as the exterior is, the interior is opulent and graceful. In one of these rooms, on February 7, 1824, Bishop Heber witnessed the Khelat ceremony, where Governor Amherst endowed robes to Indian rulers. This was a Mughal ceremony that the British had adopted. Thanks to Google and Emily Eden, we have portraits of some of the Indian servants that worked in the government house in the 1830s. They may actually have served Bishop Heber. 200 years later, the government house remains a place of breathtaking beauty, even though it is fraying at the edges. It is surrounded by lush green grounds, free of all the chaos and humanity of Calcutta. There is almost a spiritual beauty to this place, and I am absolutely thrilled to be able to visit. St. John's Church was the cathedral of British India in 1823, the headquarters of the Anglican Church. This was the main church in India since its completion in 1787. It has been modified some. The portico and carriage porches were added later, but the outside today looks pretty much like it did when Bishop Heber preached here in 1823 to 1825. And he preached here regularly, first time on 12th October 1823. St. John's Church is a copy of St. Martin in the Fields, a church in London. Bishop Heber thought the spire was pretty and looked nice on the outside, but was disappointed by the many architectural blunders that he noticed. Early East India Company architecture, indeed American architecture from that era, is full of Greek revival structures. Columns form a big part of this kind of architecture. think of the White House. The Doric columns of St. John's must have seemed paltry to Bishop Heber. St. John's Church was built on a pre existing graveyard. Most of the graves here were removed. The only ones that were left untouched were that of Admiral Watson and Job Charnock. Job Charnock, a man who was already shrouded in legend by the 1800s, was considered by the British to be the founder of Calcutta. Of course, he only founded Calcutta as much as Columbus discovered America, and in any case, he lost that honor by an order of the High Court of Calcutta in 2003. Job Charnock has a second, more enduring claim to fame. In 1890s, the British found that his tombstone was made from a special type of granite quarried around Madras and brought here. This stone was named Charnockite. When in trouble, the East India Company had a knack of finding surgeons that would bail them out. Next to Job Charnock lies William Hamilton, a surgeon who was sent along with the embassy to the court of Farrukhsiyar in 1715 when the East India Company was in serious financial trouble. William Hamilton cured Farrukhsiyar of a groin fistula, saving his marriage to Indira Cover. For his tender mercies, he was amply rewarded, and most importantly, the East India Company got a firman that allowed it to trade free of duties in Bengal. This firman was the Magna Carta of the East India Company and allowed it to grow in prosperity over the next several decades, even as the imperial treasury was impoverished. Even though Farrukhsiyar was able to save his marriage, things didn't end well for him. A few years later, he was blinded and then killed by his father-in-law, Raja Ajit Singh of Jodhpur. Farrukhsiyar's firman was so thoroughly exploited by the British that it is no exaggeration to say that feckless Farrukhsiyar's fistula firman forged the path to India, forfeiting its freedom. Perfectly preserved in quiet obscurity, the St. John's churchyard contains many delightful heritage structures which are also poignant history lessons, like the Rohilla War Monument, a monument to a now completely forgotten war against the Rohillas, or the descendant of Afghans. The Rohilla monument can be seen in this painting by Emilia Princep in 1830. Also seen in this painting in the foreground are three graves. One of these is the grave of Chief Justice Puller, who came to India in April of 1824 and died within 6 weeks of arrival. Bishop Heber took care of him when he was sick and read the service at his burial. Intermittent burials continued till the 1930s. This is the grave of Brabourne, after whom a cricket stadium is named in Bombay, and the grave is watched over by a large soccer ball. Lady Canning, the accomplished wife of Lord Canning, the first Viceroy of India, died in 1861. Her heartbroken husband built this beautiful monument at a burial site in Barakpur, where it deteriorated rapidly in the sun. This monument was then moved to St. Paul's Cathedral, where it got into everyone's way, and then eventually was moved here to St. John's Church. Her bones remain in Barakpur, buried under a replica monument. A few years ago, this monument, bizarrely, featured in a Bollywood song and dance sequence. Today, the Black Hole Monument is in St. John's Churchyard, and the story of how it got here is a remarkable testimonial to the fluidity of imperial power. In 1756, Siraj ud Dowlah, the young, impetuous Nawab of Bengal, attacked the British in Calcutta. The women and children were quickly evacuated to Falta, and the governor, Roger Drake, scandalously decamped with them. The remaining soldiers quickly surrendered. 146 British that remained in Old Fort William, mostly men, although there was at least one woman, were detained here in a small dungeon 18 feet by 14 feet in size. 123 of them perished overnight from thirst and suffocation and dehydration. Richard Holwell, their general, put up a monument here in front of Writers' Building to memorialize the dead. The monument was made of brick and plaster, and this is what it looked like in 1798. By the 1820s, this monument had deteriorated and had become a haunt for natives plying their trade. The monument was then taken down, but notice in this painting, you see again the adjutant's torques. Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India, fancied himself something of a historian. In the early 1900s, he built a replica of the original monument, this time in marble because the British were a lot richer now, and he placed it at the exact site where the old monument used to be. This monument was taken down and moved here in 1940 after it became the focal point of an agitation in the independence movement. Subhash Chandra Bose, who was expelled from the Congress Party at the time, felt that this monument was an insult to the memory of the last independent ruler of Bengal, Siraj ud Dowlah. Subhash Chandra Bose declared 3rd July 1940 as Siraj ud Dowlah Day. He was imprisoned, but the spark was lit, and following the agitation, the British quietly moved this monument into St. John's Churchyard towards the end of July 1940. This was to be Netaji's last hurrah in India. He made a daring escape from his imprisonment, made it to Nazi Germany, and was never seen in his homeland again. Although no one seems to know for sure, Holwell's monument marked the spot where the bodies were hastily buried in a ditch. So, somewhere behind me are the remains of 123 British, waiting for an enterprising historian to dig them out. Walking into St. John's Church is like taking a pilgrimage to the heart of East India Company. Bishop Heber documents large gatherings here, upwards of 300 people on Christmas Day in 1823. In February of 1824, he confirmed 236 people. The bishop ruefully notes that most of them were half castes or Anglo Indians, but there were a few white people, including three white women, which redeemed the ceremony for the acutely class conscious Bishop Heber. Inside of St. John's Church looks pretty much like it did in the time of Bishop Heber. The bluish grey marble on the inside of the church was brought here from Gore. This pipe organ, which apparently still works, has a saga of its own. It was in Madras, stolen by the French, taken to Pondicherry, and then brought back to Calcutta, and predates the church. But perhaps the finest artifact in this church is the Last Supper by Johann Zofrani, which has been here since the church's founding. The subjects in this painting were all people who lived in Calcutta at the time, and there are some extraordinary Indian touches, like the spittoon on the floor and the sword on the wall. The entire church is full of monuments, like this to men who were lost in the Great War, and many other monuments to men who are now mostly long forgotten. Near the door is an extraordinary marble monument to somebody called Colvin, who must have been important in his day. Next to it is a list of the bishops who served in Kolkata. Bishop Heber comes in at number 2. There is also a small office which has enough artifacts to make museums in the West blush. There are paintings of Warren Hastings and many other people that I don't know about, and the chair that apparently Warren Hastings sat on. This extremely hot day, I see one final artifact which makes my day. By the paintings, there is a plaque dedicated to General Claude Martin. That just shows you how interconnected and small this world was. I am at the site of the whimsically named Circular Road, now prosaically called Acharya Praful Chandra Road. This is the site of the famed Maratha ditch. In 1742, the Marathas, led by Janoji Bhosle, invaded Bengal at the invitation of the family of the deposed Nawab. This resulted in a general panic. The destruction was prolonged and intense. It is believed that over 400,000 people, mostly Hindus, died in the fighting that ensued. The bishop notes that this road formed one crucial boundary, that of the limits of English law. Inside the circular road, all matters were decided by English law, and on outside, they were decided by Hindu and Muslim personal law. Somehow, old names remain tenaciously in India. Here we can see circular tailors. On November 12, 1823, Bishop Heber consecrated Old St. James Church, a short distance from here in Nibutala Lane, noted that it was necessary to serve the large population of half castes or Anglo Indians, as they were referred to at the time. By the 1850s, the roof of Old St. James Church had fallen, and it was replaced by a brand new church built in Gothic style in the 1860s. This new St. James Church, with its twin spires, is now a Calcutta landmark. On November 18, 1823, Amelia Heber, the bishop's wife, along with some other East India Company ladies, attended a Nach at the house of Babu Ruplal Malik in Chitpur. The house still stands, with its Corinthian columns and all. Nach had been a very respectable form of entertainment in the early British period, until moralists like Bishop Heber took center stage. By the 1830s, the British were ever more reluctant to mix socially with Indians. Spectacles such as the Nach were thought to be lurid, immoral, and degenerate, and Nach girls are invariably depicted as cartoon caricatures or worse. Amelia Heber left a detailed account of the Nach, but this painting by Prinsep shows us exactly what she may have seen and brilliantly captures an evanescent face when the British were still interested in India and in Indian culture, and not absolutely convinced of the superiority of their own. Notice in this painting the Durga Puja in the background, the Indian host entertaining the European guests whose guards and servants look from the outside. You can also see the Indian women and children looking on from the terrace and a goat being sacrificed. There are a few extraordinary later depictions of Nach girls, specifically a few paintings by an American painter. The singer at the Nach that Amelia Heber witnessed was a singer called Nikki. You can see her in these paintings by Charles D. Oily. She was reputed to be pretty with a round face and big black eyes and perfect teeth. And Charles D. Oily's description gives us a fleeting glimpse into what this performance must have been like. It was hard for British to appreciate the nuances of this proto Kathak and classical Indian music, and Amelia Heber seems to have really not liked anything of the show. The song she sang in this quadrangle was a song called Taza Be Taza. This was a ghazal by Hafiz. These women were highly talented, accomplished, and trained in music and dance. Today, the house still stands inside. It's multicolored and reconstructed by different parts of the family in their own taste. And this area is full of mansions which have seen better days. One name runs like a spine through the bishop's account, that of Sir David Ochterlony. Sir David was born in Boston, came to East India Company as a cadet in 1777, spent his entire life in India, and rose to the rank of general by sheer ability. David Ochterlony was renowned for his defense of Delhi in 1804 and his conduct of the war with Nepal. After his death, the East India Company built a large monument in his honor. This monument has a very curious hybrid appearance. The base is Egyptian, the column is Syrian, and the capital is Turkish. In some ways, the hybrid appearance of this monument echoes the hybrid nature of Sir David Ochterlony himself. Fluent in Indian languages, very comfortable in Indian culture, Sir David Ochterlony was a very prominent white Mughal with his many Indian wives. This remarkable painting shows Sir David enjoying a hookah, watched over by portraits of his ancestors, perhaps from America, but surrounded by his Indian family. Like so much of what has been left behind by the East India Company, this monument has had its own afterlife. Since the 1930s, this has been the focal point of protests, and in 1960s was repurposed and called Shahid Minar, becoming a memorial now to the martyrs whose lives were lost in the Indian independence movement. Heber family lived here in what is now the Loreto House in 1824. A plaque at the gate commemorates their stay. On April 21st, 1824, Bishop Heber celebrated his 42nd birthday here in this house. The guests included Lord and Lady Amherst, the Chief Justice, and many local grandees, including Hari Mohan Thakur. Among the guests was a man called Radhakant Deb. Bishop Heber perceptibly noted the warmth of his prejudices. This man would later go on to found the Dharam Sabha and actively campaigned against widow remarriage and the abolition of sati. The bishop and Amelia bade farewell to their guests with the traditional Mughal custom of rukhsat with pan and attar. Loreto House is now a women's school, and I'm not allowed to go inside, but I am allowed to go into the church next door. By some incredible coincidence, the house in which the Heber family lived after his visitation of the upper provinces still survives on 5 Russell Street. A new bishop's palace was built after the construction of St. Thomas Cathedral, which is where the bishops of Kolkata now live. This house passed into the estate of Elias David Joseph Ezra, considered the father of the Jewish population in Calcutta, and later to YMCA. It now houses offices, and I'm quickly driven out of here as I am trying to take pictures. No visit to Calcutta can be complete without a trip to Victoria Memorial, the grandest memorial of all to the English Queen. This Taj of the Raj was constructed in the early 1900s. The comparison to Taj Mahal is more than incidental. Marble from the very same quarries in Makrana was used to construct this monument. Sitting out in the fury of the Kolkata sun without a canopy, the Queen must surely be overheating. Decorated with innumerable statues, the monument is opulent, but much of the outside is off limits to visitors. Inside the memorial is a museum, which contains this inscription of the Allahabad Declaration by Queen Victoria, a seminal moment in British rule in India. There is a statue of the scoundrel Lord Clive, looking like a naughty schoolboy looking to pick fights. There are some scattered artifacts, but the place is extremely hot, and there are no guides, only guards, even as the eye of Queen Victoria looks from the ceiling. There are painting galleries, which are somewhat hard to photograph but capture a lot of the company's school of paintings. There are some paintings of Indian leaders, kind of sort of in a hybrid British style, but the one painting I find enchanting is that of Johann Zafrani, where he paints himself next to Claude Martin. And a lot of the collection is missing for repairs, like the statue of Radhakant, and the statue of Warren Hastings, the great lawmaker, dressed in a toga, with a Hindu and a Muslim standing by his side. This extraordinary statue shows the British saw themselves as a civilization force for the savage Hindus and Muslims of India, just as much as the Romans had civilized them millennia before. The average lifespan of a British male in India was 30, and of a British female, 25. Of all the symbols left behind by the East India Company, the cemeteries are the most affecting, and I hope to see many of them during my journey. On the whole, the cemetery is very well maintained, one of the best maintained cemeteries in all of India. Some of the graves have been recently refurbished, like this one of William Jones, the Orientalist. I am at the grave of Augustus Cleveland, the legendary collector of Bhagalpur, who pacified the hill tribes. The elaborate gravestone mentions that Augustus Cleveland died young at 29 out at sea. He was brought here and buried a few days later. It is extremely laudatory of his accomplishments, saying that he accomplished by a system of conciliation what could never be accomplished by military coercion. We will hear a different story about Augustus in Bhagalpur. On 4th November 1823, Bishop Heber consecrated St. Stephen's Church in Dum Dum. This was the first of many churches he consecrated throughout India, and it was a big deal at the time. It required permission from the government of India. Hemmed in by a large amount of vegetation and surrounded by many friendly dogs, this remains a beautiful church. While in Dum Dum, Bishop Heber stayed in this great house, which was built on a mound of some antiquity. The Persian word for mound is Damdama, which was anglicized to Dum Dum, which then gave its name to the entire neighborhood. Major Hardwick, the commandant of the artillery station at Dum Dum, whose guest Bishop Heber was in this house, can be considered the father of modern Indian zoology. General Hardwick was an old India hand, already in the country for almost 50 years. He had made this house into a very extensive museum containing a large collection of stuffed animals and some live specimens. General Hardwick also had a rich collection of drawings and paintings of different animals, and Bishop had a delightful time going over the paintings. These were later collected, lithographed, and published. General Hardwick and his zoology are all completely forgotten now, but this house remains famous for an earlier occupant, Robert Clive. Robert Clive built the upper story of this enormous buttressed house and lived here, commuting from here to Kolkata every day. Even in the 1760s, Calcutta was crowded and prone to disease. Robert Clive preferred the suburbs.